Sarah, 21. The best gift you could give us would be if you just disappeared from our lives forever. Those were the exact words my parents said to me on my 18th birthday. Not happy birthday, not we love you. They wanted me gone. So I gave them exactly what they asked for. I vanished without a trace that very night, leaving behind everything I'd ever known. But what they didn't expect was that I'd be watching them from the shadows, planning my revenge. Before we continue, please subscribe. 3 years later, I'm about to destroy the people who threw away their own daughter like garbage. But here's the thing. The revenge I thought I was getting? It wasn't even close to the real story. Because sometimes, the people you think are your enemies are actually trying to protect you from something far worse. And sometimes the person who saves your life has been waiting in the shadows longer than you could ever imagine. Growing up as Sarah Mitchell in Riverside seemed like a blessing. Our house was the envy of Maple Street, a pristine 2-story colonial with perfectly manicured gardens that my mother, Linda, tended to religiously every weekend. My father, Robert, was the respected branch manager at First National Bank, always impeccably dressed in his pressed suits and genuine leather shoes. To everyone who looked at us, we were the ideal American family. But perfection, I learned, is often just an elaborate performance. My childhood memories are filled with moments that seemed loving at the time, but now feel calculated in hindsight. Family dinners where my parents would ask about my day, but their eyes always seemed distant, distracted. Birthday parties where they invited half the neighborhood, taking photos that would later flood their social media accounts. But the celebrations always felt more like productions than genuine moments of joy. I was an obedient daughter. I maintained a 3.8 GPA throughout high school, played violin in the school orchestra, and volunteered at the local animal shelter every Saturday. My parents would beam with pride when neighbors complimented my achievements, but behind closed doors, their praise felt hollow, mechanical. "That's nice, honey," became my mother's standard response to any accomplishment I shared. My father would nod approvingly, but immediately return to his newspaper or laptop. The first real crack in our family facade appeared during my senior year. I'd been accepted to 3 universities, including my dream school, Northwestern, with a partial scholarship. When I excitedly shared the news over dinner, expecting celebration, my parents exchanged a look I couldn't decipher. "College is expensive, Sarah," my father said slowly. "We'll need to think about what makes the most financial sense." My mother quickly changed the subject to her garden club meeting. That night, I heard them arguing in hushed tones through their bedroom wall. I caught fragments. 18 next month. Can't keep pretending. And she'll find out eventually. I convinced myself they were worried about tuition costs. Every teenager thinks their parents' problems revolve around them. As my 18th birthday approached, their behavior became increasingly strange. They would stop talking when I entered rooms. Phone calls would be abruptly ended if I walked by. My mother, usually meticulous about party planning, seemed reluctant to discuss my birthday celebration. When I suggested inviting friends over, she claimed to be too busy with work. When I asked about going out to dinner, my father said we needed to keep things simple this year. The week before my birthday, I discovered something that should have been a warning sign. While looking for batteries in my father's desk drawer, I found a folder labeled with my name. Inside were documents I didn't understand, legal papers with lots of signatures and official seals. I saw my birth certificate, but also papers from lawyers and what looked like bank statements. The numbers were confusing, but they were large, very large. When I asked my father about it that evening, his face went pale. "Those are just college planning documents, Sarah, nothing for you to worry about." But the way he snatched the folder from my hands and the panic in his eyes told a different story. My mother started drinking more wine with dinner. She'd always enjoyed a glass or two, but now she was finishing entire bottles. She'd stare at me across the dinner table with an expression I couldn't read, sadness mixed with something that almost looked like guilt. 3 days before my birthday, I overheard another late-night argument. This time, the words were clearer. "We can't keep lying to her, Robert." "We don't have a choice, Linda. It's too late to go back now." The fear in their voices was unmistakable. I should have run then, but I was still their daughter, still believing that whatever was wrong could be fixed. I had no idea that in 72 hours my entire world would explode. My 18th birthday arrived on a gray March morning that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. I woke up to silence, no happy birthday sung from downstairs, no smell of my favorite pancakes wafting up from the kitchen, just the sound of my parents moving around quietly like they were trying not to wake me. When I finally went downstairs, my mother was scrubbing the already spotless kitchen counter with aggressive intensity. My father sat at the breakfast table, still in his pajamas at 10 a.m., staring at his untouched coffee. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," my mother said without looking up, her voice flat and rehearsed. The day dragged on in uncomfortable silence. No friends called because my parents had insisted we weren't having a party this year. No presents appeared on the coffee table where they usually accumulated throughout the day. By evening, I wondered if they'd simply forgotten the significance of the date entirely. "We're taking you to dinner," my father announced around 6 o'clock, his tone suggesting obligation rather than celebration. "Somewhere nice. Get dressed." My mother was already putting on her coat, avoiding eye contact. They chose Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant we'd been to maybe twice in my entire life. The kind of place where conversations happen in hushed tones and every table feels isolated from the others. We were seated in a corner booth, far from other diners. In hindsight, they'd probably requested it specifically. The meal was torture. My parents ordered wine, 2 bottles, and barely touched their food. Every attempt I made at normal conversation died within seconds. "How was work today, Dad?" "Fine." "Mom, did Mrs. Henderson's roses bloom yet?" "I don't know." The silence between us felt heavy, suffocating. Halfway through my untouched chicken parmesan, my father cleared his throat. "Sarah, your mother and I need to discuss something with you." The formality in his voice made my stomach drop. This wasn't how parents talked to their children on birthdays. This was how lawyers delivered bad news. My mother reached for her wine glass with shaking hands. "We've been thinking about your future," she began, but her voice cracked. She took a large gulp of wine and tried again. "About what's best for everyone involved." "What do you mean?" I asked, though some primitive part of my brain was already screaming warnings. My father took over, his banker's voice steady and businesslike. "Sarah, you're 18 now, an adult, and we think it's time you learn to be independent, completely independent." "I don't understand. I'm going to college in the fall. I'll be plenty independent then." "No," my mother said sharply, finally looking at me directly. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her expression was resolute. "That's not what we mean." My father leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table like he was about to foreclose on someone's home. "What we're trying to say, Sarah, is that we think it would be best for everyone if you weren't part of our lives anymore." The restaurant noise faded to nothing. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "What?" "The best gift you could give us," my mother said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "would be if you just disappeared from our lives forever." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked between their faces, searching for any sign that this was some twisted joke, some test I needed to pass. But my father's expression remained coldly professional, and my mother had turned away, signaling the waiter for another bottle of wine. "You're serious," I whispered. "We've given this a lot of thought," my father continued, as if he were explaining mortgage terms to a client. "We'll give you $5,000 to get started somewhere else. But after tonight, we don't want any contact. No calls, no visits, no letters. You need to understand that this isn't negotiable." I sat there, feeling like I was drowning in plain sight while other families around us laughed and celebrated their own milestones. My parents, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had just asked me to erase myself from existence. The ride home from Romano's happened in complete silence. I sat in the back seat like a stranger they'd picked up hitchhiking, staring out the window at houses where other families were probably watching TV together, helping kids with homework, doing all the normal things I'd apparently never be part of again. When we pulled into our driveway, my father turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. "Sarah," he said without turning around, "we'll leave the money on the kitchen counter tonight. We expect you to be gone by morning." "Gone where?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "That's not our concern anymore," my mother replied, finally showing some emotion, but it was irritation, not love. "You're an adult now. Adults figure things out for themselves." I stumbled into the house feeling like I was moving through thick fog. Everything looked exactly the same. The family photos on the mantle, my honor roll certificates still proudly displayed on the refrigerator, the couch where I'd spent countless evenings doing homework while my parents watched the news. But it all felt like props in a play that had suddenly ended. In my room, I sat on my bed and stared at the walls covered with posters of bands I'd loved, photos of friends from school, acceptance letters from colleges that now seemed like cruel jokes. How do you pack up 18 years of life into whatever you can carry? I started with practical items, clothes, toiletries, my laptop, phone charger. Then I grabbed my violin, even though I had nowhere to play it, some photos of friends, my journal from sophomore year when I'd written terrible poetry about boys and dreams of becoming a writer, the small jewelry box my grandmother had given me before she died when I was 12, the only family heirloom I possessed. Everything else would stay behind, like evidence of a person who'd simply ceased to exist. Around 2 a.m., I crept downstairs to find exactly $5,000 in crisp hundreds stacked on the kitchen counter, held down by the salt shaker. No note, no explanation, just payment for my disappearance, like they were buying my silence along with my absence. I wrote them a letter on notebook paper, my hands shaking so badly I could barely form the words. "You asked me to disappear, so I'm giving you exactly what you wanted. But don't think this means I'll never understand why. Don't think this means I'll forgive, and don't think this means you'll never see me again. Some gifts come with conditions you don't expect." I left it where the money had been. I called the only cab company in town, whispering my address to the dispatcher and asking them to wait at the corner so they wouldn't wake my parents, as if I still cared about their comfort after what they'd done to me. The cab driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, took one look at my tear-stained face and the single duffel bag I carried and didn't ask questions. "Where to, honey?" she said gently. "The bus station," I managed to say. During the 20-minute ride through empty streets, I stared back at the only home I'd ever known until it disappeared behind trees and darkness. The finality of it hit me then. I was completely alone in the world. No family, no safety net, no plan beyond getting as far away as possible. At Greyhound, I bought a ticket on the first bus leaving town, a 6 a.m. departure to Chicago. I had 5 hours to kill in plastic chairs under fluorescent lights, surrounded by other people who looked like they were running from something too. I spent those hours thinking about revenge, not dramatic, movie-style vengeance, but something more devastating, the slow, methodical destruction of everything they'd built their perfect lives around. They wanted me to disappear? Fine, but someday, when they least expected it, I'd reappear and show them exactly what they'd thrown away. I just had to survive long enough to make it happen. Chicago hit me like a slap of reality. The bus station was a chaos of homeless people, travelers, and predators who could smell desperation from across the terminal. I clutched my duffel bag and tried to look confident while having absolutely no idea what to do next. The first week was a blur of cheap motels that charged by the night, vending machine dinners, and growing panic as I watched my $5,000 shrink with terrifying speed. A dingy room at the Sunset Motel cost $60 a night. Food was another $20. I did the math obsessively. At this rate, I'd be broke in less than 3 months. But I wasn't ready to disappear completely yet. I was angry, and anger needs witnesses. I created a fake Facebook account under the name Jessica Chen and sent friend requests to everyone I could find from Riverside, neighbors, my parents' co-workers, people from our church, my old classmates. Within days, I had an inside view of my hometown, including my parents' social media activity. The first post appeared 3 days after I'd left. My mother had shared a photo of her garden with the caption, "Sometimes pruning the dead branches helps the whole plant flourish, feeling blessed and free." 12 people liked it. Mrs. Henderson from next door commented, "So true, Linda, spring cleaning for the soul." My father's LinkedIn remained professionally bland, but I noticed he'd updated his relationship status to show only my mother, removing any mention of having children. They were erasing me systematically, publicly. but I was watching everything. Through my fake account, I learned that they'd told people I'd decided to start fresh after graduation. They were spinning it as my choice, painting themselves as supportive parents who respected their daughter's independence. The lie was so smooth, so believable, that even I almost bought it for a moment. I found a job at a 24-hour diner called Mel's, washing dishes for minimum wage plus whatever tips the waitresses shared. The work was mindless and exhausting, which helped distract from the constant ache of betrayal. My coworkers were a mix of college students, single mothers, and people like me who'd landed there by accident or desperation. The night manager, Carol, was a chain-smoking woman in her 50s who'd seen every sob story imaginable. She didn't ask questions when I paid rent weekly on a studio apartment above a laundromat, or when I jumped every time someone mentioned calling family. She just worked me hard and paid me fairly, which was more kindness than I'd expected from the world. During slow hours, I'd scroll through my hometown's digital life on my phone. I watched my parents attend dinner parties, charity events, and church services, smiling in photos like nothing had changed. My father got promoted to regional manager. My mother won some gardening contest. Their lives were improving without me in them, but I also started noticing things that others might miss. My mother's smiles looked forced in recent photos. My father had started wearing reading glasses, and there were dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. In a photo from their 20th wedding anniversary dinner, they sat on opposite sides of the booth, not touching, both looking at their phones instead of each other. The most telling detail came from a mutual friend's post about running into them at the grocery store. "Ran into the Mitchells today. They seem quieter lately. I asked about Sarah, and they got really weird about it. Linda actually teared up. Hope everything's okay with their family." So they weren't as unaffected as they wanted everyone to believe. The perfect facade was cracking, and people were starting to notice. 3 months into my exile, something unexpected happened. I was walking home from my late shift when I noticed a woman watching me from across the street. She was elderly, well-dressed, with silver hair and an expensive handbag. When I looked directly at her, she didn't look away like most people would. She smiled and waved like we were old friends. The next night, she was there again. By the third night, I was convinced I was being stalked. On the fourth night, the elderly woman didn't just watch from across the street. She crossed over and approached me directly as I walked home from Mel's, my apron still smelling of grease and desperation. "Sarah Mitchell," she said, and my blood turned to ice. Nobody in Chicago knew my real name. I'd been using Sarah Johnson on all my paperwork, paying cash for everything, staying invisible. "I think you have me confused with someone else," I said, gripping my keys between my fingers like Carol had taught me for protection. She smiled, and something about it reminded me of photographs I'd seen but couldn't place. "No confusion, dear. I've been looking for you for quite some time. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and I believe we need to talk." Every instinct screamed at me to run. Strange women didn't approach 18-year-old runaways with job offers and kind smiles. This was how girls disappeared, became statistics, ended up on milk cartons. But Eleanor wasn't giving off predator vibes. She seemed familiar somehow. "I know this is frightening," she continued, reading my hesitation perfectly. "But I also know you're working 16-hour days to afford a studio apartment that barely has heat, and you're down to your last $300. I'm not here to hurt you, Sarah. I'm here to help." She couldn't possibly know those details unless she'd been watching me for weeks. The smart thing would be to walk away, but desperation makes you consider options you'd normally reject. "What kind of help?" "The kind that comes with no strings attached except one," Eleanor said. "You let me give you a job, a decent place to live, and a chance to get back on your feet. In return, you help me with a project I've been working on for 20 years. "What kind of project?" "Justice," she said simply. That night, I followed Eleanor Hartwell to her car, a pristine black Mercedes that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. She drove me to a brownstone in Lincoln Park, the kind of neighborhood where parking spots cost more than my monthly rent. Inside, the house was immaculate but lived in. Expensive furniture that showed signs of actual use, bookshelves filled with well-read novels, family photos covering every available surface. It felt like a real home, something I'd almost forgotten existed. "I have a proposition," Eleanor said, pouring tea from a set that looked like it belonged in a museum. I run a small consulting business, helping people find information they need for legal cases, family matters, that sort of thing. I need someone with computer skills, someone who understands social media, someone who can blend into different environments when necessary. You're offering me a job as a private investigator? Something like that, she smiled. The pay is $1,500 a week plus room and board. The upstairs apartment is furnished and includes all utilities. The only requirement is absolute discretion about the work we do. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But I was running out of options, and something about Eleanor felt safe in a way I couldn't explain. Why me? I asked. Because you understand what it feels like to be betrayed by the people who should protect you, she said quietly. And because you have a particular skill set that could be very useful. I don't have any special skills. Eleanor pulled out a manila folder and opened it on the coffee table. Inside were printed screenshots of every social media post I'd made under my fake identity, every piece of information I'd gathered about my parents, every digital footprint I'd created in 3 months of watching from the shadows. You've conducted a fairly sophisticated surveillance operation using nothing but public social media and basic research skills, she said. Most people your age can't even balance a checkbook, but you've been tracking your parents' activities, monitoring their social circles, and gathering intelligence like someone with years of training. My mouth went dry. How did you find all this? The same way you found information about your parents, Eleanor said. Patience, observation, and understanding that people always leave digital trails. The question is, are you interested in learning to do it professionally? I stared at the evidence of my own digital detective work spread across her coffee table. For months, I'd been operating on pure instinct and rage, but she was right. I had been conducting surveillance. What's the real catch? I asked. Eleanor's smile faded, and for the first time, she looked her age. The catch, dear, is that the justice we'll be seeking might hurt people you once cared about. Eleanor's brownstone became my sanctuary and my training ground. The upstairs apartment was small but luxurious compared to anywhere I'd lived since leaving Riverside. Hardwood floors, a real kitchen with appliances that worked, windows that actually opened to let in fresh air instead of the smell of industrial detergent from the laundromat below my old place. The work Eleanor gave me started simple. Background checks on potential business partners, social media monitoring for divorce cases, finding people who'd skipped town owing money. She taught me about public records, how to navigate county databases, the art of extracting information from people without them realizing they were being interviewed. Information is currency, Eleanor would say during our evening debriefings over dinner. People trade it without thinking. A casual comment about where they bank, mentioning their mother's maiden name in conversation, posting photos that reveal more than they intended. Your job is to become a collector of these casual revelations. Within weeks, I was earning more money than I'd ever imagined possible. Eleanor paid exactly what she'd promised, and bonuses appeared regularly. An extra $500 for completing a case quickly, a $1,000 research bonus, when I uncovered information that saved a client's custody battle. But the real education wasn't in surveillance techniques or data mining. Eleanor was teaching me how to become someone else entirely. She hired professionals, a voice coach who helped me develop different accents and speaking patterns, a stylist who showed me how clothing could completely transform how others perceived me, even a behavioral analyst who taught me to read body language and mirror social cues. You're naturally observant, Eleanor explained during one of our training sessions. But observation without application is just voyeurism. You need to learn to use what you see. I practiced on strangers, striking up conversations in coffee shops to extract personal information, befriending lonely office workers to learn about their company's internal politics, even dating men briefly to access their social circles before disappearing from their lives as mysteriously as I'd appeared. The work was intoxicating. For the first time since my birthday disaster, I felt powerful, in control, valuable. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Meanwhile, my surveillance of my parents continued, now with professional tools and techniques. Eleanor had provided me with software that could monitor their social media activity, track their financial records, even access their cell phone locations. What I discovered painted a picture that was far more complex than simple parental rejection. My father's promotion had come with intense scrutiny from bank auditors. There were irregular transfers from accounts he managed, money that seemed to disappear and reappear in patterns that didn't make sense. My mother had started seeing a therapist twice a week and had joined 3 different support groups, one for parents of missing children, one for families dealing with financial stress, and surprisingly, one for people recovering from emotional abuse. The most shocking discovery came 6 months into my new life. While researching property records for a client, I decided to look up my childhood home. The mortgage had been refinanced twice in the past year, and there was a lien against the property from something called the Hartwell Family Trust. "Eleanor," I said that evening, showing her the documents on my laptop screen, "do you know anything about a Hartwell Family Trust that has some kind of claim on my parents' house?" The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. She set down her teacup with shaking hands and stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I think it's time I told you why I was really looking for you." She stood up and walked to a locked filing cabinet in the corner of her living room. From it, she pulled a thick folder labeled with my name. Not the name I'd been using in Chicago, but my real name. The folder was old, worn, like it had been handled frequently over many years. "Your parents didn't just decide to throw you away on your 18th birthday, Eleanor said, returning to her chair. "They were protecting themselves from something they'd done long ago. And I'm afraid I'm partly responsible." While I was learning to become a professional ghost in Chicago, my parents' carefully constructed world back in Riverside was beginning to crumble in ways I could never have orchestrated myself. The first crack appeared at the Riverside Community Foundation's annual charity auction, an event my parents had attended religiously for 15 years. According to my social media monitoring, they'd arrived separately, my father coming straight from work, my mother meeting him there after what her calendar showed was a 2-hour therapy session. Margaret Doyle, the foundation president and my mother's former best friend, had publicly confronted them in front of half the town's social elite. I knew this because Margaret's daughter Ashley posted about it immediately afterward. "OMG drama at the charity thing. Mrs. Doyle literally asked the Mitchells where their daughter was and why they've been lying to everyone about Sarah choosing to be independent. Mom says Mrs. Mitchell started crying right there by the silent auction table." The post got 43 comments before Ashley deleted it, but screenshots had already been shared in several local Facebook groups. By morning, "What happened?" to Sarah Mitchell was trending among Riverside High graduates, and not in a good way for my parents. The unraveling accelerated when Tommy Rodriguez, my old lab partner who now worked at the bank with my father, started asking uncomfortable questions. Tommy had always been observant, the kind of kid who noticed when teachers wore the same outfit twice, or when someone got a new haircut. He'd apparently been watching my father's behavior and decided something was wrong. "Mr. Mitchell used to talk about Sarah all the time," Tommy posted in our class Facebook group, showed us pictures from her concerts, bragged about her college acceptances. Then suddenly in March, nothing. When I asked him about her graduation ceremony, he looked like he was going to be sick. That's not normal parent behavior. The post exploded with comments from classmates who'd wondered the same thing. Emma Chen mentioned that I'd never responded to graduation party invites. Jake Morrison said his mom saw my parents at the grocery store and they acted weird when she asked about me. Lisa Park revealed that her family had sent me a graduation card that was returned as undeliverable. But the real damage came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, our elderly next-door neighbor who'd witnessed everything through her kitchen window for 25 years. Mrs. Henderson had apparently been harboring suspicions since the night I left. She'd seen the taxi, noticed that my parents never mentioned me anymore, observed that my mother had stopped tending the garden with her usual enthusiasm. More importantly, she'd been documenting everything in her daily diary, a habit she'd maintained since retiring. When the rumors about my disappearance reached her, Mrs. Henderson did something that shocked everyone who knew her quiet, non-confrontational personality. She called the police. Officer Patricia Santos, who'd graduated 2 years ahead of me and knew our family well, was assigned to do a welfare check. What she found was a family in crisis. My parents couldn't provide any contact information for me, couldn't explain why they'd told different stories to different people about my absence, and became evasive and hostile when asked direct questions about the last time they'd seen me. The police report, which became public record after Tommy's girlfriend who worked at the courthouse leaked it, painted a disturbing picture. My parents had refused to file a missing person report, claiming I was an adult who'd chosen to cut contact. When Officer Santos asked to see my room, my mother had initially refused, then revealed that they'd already packed up all my belongings and donated them to Goodwill. In my experience, Officer Santos noted in her report, parents of missing children don't typically dispose of their possessions within weeks of their disappearance. The Mitchells' behavior is consistent with individuals who have knowledge they're unwilling to share. The report's existence spread through town like wildfire. My father's position at the bank became precarious when customers started questioning whether they could trust someone who might have driven away his own daughter. My mother resigned from every volunteer position she held, unable to face the whispers and pointed questions. Their social media presence, once filled with proud parent posts and community involvement, became sporadic and defensive. When they did post, the comment sections filled with versions of the same question: "Where's Sarah?" From my apartment in Chicago, I watched their reputation disintegrate with a mixture of satisfaction and unexpected sadness. I'd wanted them to face consequences, but seeing their lives unravel felt more complicated than I'd anticipated, especially because I was starting to suspect their reasons for pushing me away might be more complex than simple rejection. Eleanor's folder contained documents that made my head spin: birth certificates, legal papers, photographs spanning decades, and financial records that painted a picture I couldn't have imagined. But before she could explain everything, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Sarah, please don't hang up. This is Mrs. Coleman from your senior English class." My breath caught. Mrs. Coleman had been my favorite teacher, the one who'd encouraged my writing, who'd stayed after school to help me edit college application essays. Why was she calling me now, 8 months after I'd vanished? "Mrs. Coleman, how did you get this number?" "That's complicated," she said, her voice shaky. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about your parents. Something I should have told you years ago, but I was sworn to secrecy. After everything that's happened, I can't keep quiet anymore." Eleanor was watching me intently, and I realized this call wasn't coincidental. "What do you mean?" "Can we meet? I'm in Chicago for a conference this weekend. There are things about your family that you deserve to know, things that explain why your parents did what they did on your birthday." 2 days later, I sat across from Mrs. Coleman in a downtown coffee shop, feeling like I was 18 again, nervous about a test I hadn't studied for. She looked older, more fragile than I remembered, and kept glancing around as if she expected someone to be watching us. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you could put people in danger," she began. "Your parents made me promise never to reveal this, but seeing what's happening to them now, watching them destroy themselves with guilt, I can't stay silent." She pulled out an old-school folder, the kind teachers used for important documents. Inside were photocopies of newspaper articles from 18 years ago, legal documents, and photographs that made my stomach drop. "Your parents aren't your biological parents," she said quietly. The coffee shop noise faded to a dull roar. "What?" "You were adopted when you were 6 months old, but not through normal channels. Your biological mother was a student of mine, a brilliant girl named Jennifer Hartwell who got involved with the wrong people during her senior year." Hartwell. The same name as Eleanor, the same name on the trust that held a lien on my parents' house. Mrs. Coleman continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jennifer was killed in what police called a car accident, but everyone who knew her suspected it was something more sinister. She'd been trying to get away from a man who'd been threatening her, someone with connections to organized crime in the area. Before she died, she made your parents promise to protect you, to never let anyone know where you came from." "My parents knew her?" "Your father handled her banking, helped her save money to disappear. Your mother was her secret confidant, the only person Jennifer trusted. When Jennifer died, you were put into foster care, but your parents fought to adopt you. They changed your name, moved to a different part of town, created an entirely new identity for you. I thought about all the legal papers I'd found in my father's desk, the mysterious documents I'd never understood. They were protecting me? For 18 years, they lived in fear that whoever killed Jennifer would discover you existed. Every birthday party, every school play, every honor roll certificate they posted, they worried it would make you visible to the wrong people. When you turned 18, they panicked. They thought if you stayed close to them, eventually someone would connect the dots. The revelation hit me like physical pain. So they threw me away to protect me? They thought if you disappeared voluntarily, you'd be safer than if you stayed and someone came looking. They never meant for you to end up on the streets, Sarah. They thought you'd go to college, start fresh, somewhere safe. Mrs. Coleman reached across the table and touched my hand. They've been destroying themselves with guilt ever since you left. Your mother hasn't slept through the night in months. Your father quit his job last week because the stress was making him sick. They're both in therapy, trying to figure out how to find you without putting you in danger. I pulled my hand away, my mind racing. If this is true, why tell me now? Because, Mrs. Coleman said, glancing around the coffee shop again, I think the people they were trying to protect you from have found you anyway. Strange men have been asking questions around town about you, about your parents, about Jennifer. Someone's been watching your house, following your mother to therapy appointments. My blood turned cold. What kind of men? The kind who don't give their real names when they ask questions. The kind who make people nervous just by existing in the same space. She leaned forward urgently. Sarah, I think you need to warn your parents. Whatever anger you have toward them, they're in real danger now. As Mrs. Coleman left the coffee shop, I sat staring at the documents she'd given me, my entire understanding of my life rearranging itself. My parents hadn't rejected me out of cruelty or indifference. They'd sacrificed their relationship with me to keep me alive. And Eleanor, who'd been watching me for months, who'd trained me in surveillance and investigation, who had the same last name as my dead biological mother, Eleanor wasn't just a random benefactor. I walked back to the brownstone with questions burning in my chest and a growing certainty that my story was far from over. If anything, I was just beginning to understand how deep the deception went and how many people had been trying to protect me from a truth I was only now beginning to glimpse. Eleanor was waiting for me when I returned to the brownstone, the manila folder still open on her coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. She took one look at my face and poured 2 glasses of wine without asking if I wanted any. Mrs. Coleman told you, she said. It wasn't a question. Are you my grandmother? I asked directly. Eleanor's composure cracked for the first time since I'd known her. She aged 10 years in front of my eyes, her professional mask slipping to reveal someone who'd been carrying an enormous burden for decades. Yes, she whispered, Jennifer was my daughter. The wine sat untouched as Eleanor told me the story Mrs. Coleman had only sketched in outline. Jennifer Hartwell had been 22, fresh out of college with a degree in social work and dreams of helping troubled kids. She'd taken a job at a community center in a rough part of town, trying to make a difference in the world. She was idealistic, Eleanor said, her voice thick with memory and regret. She thought she could save everyone, including a young man named Marcus Delacroix who ran drugs for some very dangerous people. She thought if she could get him into rehab, convince him to testify against his suppliers, she could break the cycle. What happened? Marcus was killed first, shot execution style in an alley 3 blocks from the community center. Jennifer went into hiding, but she was already pregnant with you. She'd been secretly recording conversations, gathering evidence, building a case that could have brought down a significant drug operation. Eleanor pulled out photographs from the folder, pictures of a young woman who looked startlingly like me, holding a baby that had to be me as an infant. Jennifer had my eyes, my stubborn chin, my habit of tucking hair behind my ear when nervous. The night Jennifer died, she'd arranged to meet with FBI agents who were going to put her in witness protection. Someone found out about the meeting and ran her car off the road. The evidence she'd gathered disappeared and you became an orphan before your first birthday. But my parents, Robert and Linda, they saved me? Your father had been helping Jennifer manage her finances, moving money into accounts that couldn't be traced back to her real identity. Your mother had been providing childcare when Jennifer couldn't afford a sitter. They were the only people Jennifer trusted completely. Eleanor stood and walked to the window, staring out at the Chicago skyline. After Jennifer died, I hired private investigators to find you. It took me 6 months to discover that Robert and Linda had adopted you and changed your name. By then, they'd moved, created an entirely new life, made it nearly impossible to trace you. Why didn't you contact them? Why didn't you try to be part of my life? Because I agreed with their strategy, Eleanor said sadly. The people who killed Jennifer were still out there. As long as you stayed hidden, as long as nobody knew Jennifer Hartwell had a daughter, you were safe. I watched from a distance, made sure you were healthy and happy, but I never interfered. Until my 18th birthday. Until your parents panicked and made you visible in the worst possible way, Eleanor corrected. A missing teenager draws attention, Sarah. Police reports, social media campaigns, people asking questions. The very thing they'd tried to avoid for 18 years happened anyway. Eleanor returned to her chair and opened another section of the folder. Inside were surveillance photos of men I didn't recognize, license plate numbers, financial records showing unusual activity in accounts connected to the old drug operation. 3 weeks after you left Riverside, someone started asking questions about Jennifer Hartwell's daughter. They'd finally connected the dots between your disappearance and the case from 18 years ago. The investigation your mother started by having that breakdown at the charity auction caught the attention of people who'd been waiting decades for you to surface. My hands were shaking as I reached for the wine. So by trying to protect me, my parents actually put me in more danger? Yes, and by trying to help you, I may have made things worse. Eleanor's voice was barely audible. The consulting work I've been having you do, the surveillance techniques I've been teaching you, I've been preparing you to defend yourself against the people who killed your biological mother. People who are looking for me right now? Eleanor nodded grimly. People who think you might have access to evidence that could still destroy them, even after all these years. People who've already hurt your parents trying to find you. The photographs Eleanor showed me next made my blood freeze. They were surveillance shots taken outside my parents' house in Riverside. Men in expensive suits sitting in black cars, following my mother to grocery stores, watching my father leave for work. The timestamps showed they'd been under surveillance for weeks. They've escalated beyond just asking questions, Eleanor said grimly. Your father was approached at the bank last Tuesday. 2 men claiming to be federal investigators asked about his involvement in the Jennifer Hartwell case. When he told them he didn't know what they were talking about, they mentioned your name and current location. Eleanor pulled out a laptop and showed me financial records that painted a terrifying picture. Large sums of money had been moving through offshore accounts connected to the same criminal organization that had killed Jennifer. More importantly, someone had been paying for professional surveillance on my family for months. This isn't random street criminals, Sarah. This is organized, well-funded, and patient. They've been waiting 18 years for you to surface, and now that you have, they're not going to stop until they're certain you can't hurt them. I thought about my parents, probably terrified and confused, not knowing why their quiet life was suddenly under scrutiny. We have to warn them. We have to do more than warn them, Eleanor said. We have to end this permanently. She opened a safe I hadn't known existed, hidden behind a bookshelf in her living room. Inside were documents that made my training in surveillance look like amateur hour, detailed financial records, photographs of criminal activities, recorded conversations, and most shocking of all, a letter addressed to me in handwriting I'd never seen before. Your mother left this for you before she died, Eleanor said softly, along with evidence that could destroy the people who killed her, if we can get it to the right authorities. The letter was written on simple notebook paper, the kind I'd used for homework throughout high school. Jennifer's handwriting was neat, precise, like a teacher's. My dearest daughter, it began, if you're reading this, it means I didn't survive to protect you myself, but it also means you're old enough and strong enough to finish what I started. The letter explained everything, how Jennifer had documented years of criminal activity, how she'd recorded conversations with corrupt officials, how she'd photographed money transfers and drug transactions. More importantly, it explained where she'd hidden the evidence. She gave copies to 3 people she trusted completely, Eleanor explained. Your adoptive parents have one set, I have another. The third set was hidden somewhere only you would be able to find it using clues that would only make sense to her daughter. The clues in the letter seemed like riddles at first. References to the place where music lives in wooden boxes, the garden where memories grow in frames, and the room where dreams are filed alphabetically. But as I read them over, I realized they were describing specific locations in the house where I'd grown up. She hid evidence in my childhood home, evidence that's still there unless your parents found it and moved it. Evidence that's detailed enough to put away the people who've been terrorizing your family for the past 2 months. Eleanor closed the laptop and looked at me seriously. Sarah, I've spent the last 8 months training you for this moment, teaching you surveillance, investigation, how to blend in, how to extract information. I didn't save you from the streets out of random kindness. I saved you because I knew eventually you'd need these skills to survive. You want me to go back to Riverside. I want you to go home, find your mother's evidence, and help me destroy the people who stole your family from you twice. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. But I won't lie to you about the risks. If we do this, if we go after these people directly, there's a good chance none of us will survive it. I thought about my parents, living in fear and guilt for crimes they didn't commit. I thought about Jennifer, the mother I'd never known who died trying to protect people like me. I thought about the 18 years of lies and protection and sacrifice that had brought me to this moment. When do we leave for Riverside? I asked. Eleanor smiled for the first time since Mrs. Coleman's call. Tomorrow night, it's time to bring your parents home. The drive back to Riverside felt like traveling through time. Every mile brought back memories I'd spent 8 months trying to forget. The curve in the highway where I'd always known we were almost home. The billboard for Murphy's farm stand where we'd bought pumpkins every October. The exit sign that had once meant safety and family dinners and homework help at the kitchen table. Eleanor drove in focused silence, checking her mirrors constantly, taking random turns that seemed designed to lose anyone who might be following us. In the passenger seat, I clutched the letter from my biological mother and tried to calm my racing heart. We parked 3 blocks from my childhood home, in front of the elementary school where I'd learned to read and fallen off the monkey bars in 3rd grade. At 11 p.m., the neighborhood was quiet, but Eleanor pointed out the black sedan parked across from my parents' house and the man sitting inside it, barely visible in the darkness. They're still watching, she murmured. We'll have to go in through the back, through the Hendersons' yard. My hands were shaking as we crept through familiar backyards, past the fence where my father had taught me to throw a softball, around the garden shed where I'd hidden when I was 8 and convinced I was in trouble for breaking my mother's favorite mug. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, like a movie set designed to replicate my childhood but built at 3/4 scale. The back door key was still hidden under the fake rock by my mother's tomato plants. Some things never change, even when everything else falls apart. Inside, the house felt like a museum of my former life. Family photos still lined the hallway, including pictures of me at various ages that my parents apparently couldn't bear to remove. My honor roll certificates were still on the refrigerator. The living room furniture was arranged exactly as it had been the night I left, as if my parents were frozen in time, waiting for me to come home. But there were new details that broke my heart. Prescription bottles on the kitchen counter, anxiety medication for my mother, sleeping pills for my father, a stack of business cards from therapists and private investigators on the coffee table, a calendar by the phone with Sarah's birthday circled in red marker with question marks written in my mother's handwriting. They never stopped looking for you, Eleanor whispered, reading the pain on my face. Following Jennifer's clues, we went first to the place where music lives in wooden boxes, my father's study, where his old vinyl records were stored in wooden crates he'd built himself. Behind the Beatles albums, exactly where the letter suggested, we found a manila envelope sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. Inside were photographs that made my stomach turn. Men I didn't recognize exchanging briefcases full of money, documents showing drug shipments and payment schedules. Most damaging of all, photographs of police officers and city officials taking envelopes of cash from the same men who'd later killed Jennifer. The garden where memories grow in frames led us to my mother's craft room, where she'd always displayed family photos in handmade frames. Behind a picture of my first day of kindergarten, another envelope contained financial records showing how drug money had been laundered through legitimate businesses for years. But it was the third location that nearly broke me. The room where dreams are filed alphabetically was my bedroom, where I'd kept all my school papers and college brochures organized in a filing system that had driven my parents crazy. Behind my acceptance letter from Northwestern, I found the most devastating evidence yet: recordings of conversations between the men who'd killed Jennifer, planning her murder in cold, businesslike detail. As I held the small digital recorder that contained my biological mother's final gift to me, I heard a car door slam outside. Eleanor rushed to the window and cursed under her breath. "They know we're here," she said. "3 cars just pulled up." But before we could move toward the back door, the front door opened with a key. My parents walked in, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen them, followed by 2 men in dark suits who definitely weren't there to help. "Hello, Sarah," one of the men said calmly. "We've been waiting a very long time to meet you." My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in 8 months. My mother's hands were shaking so badly she could barely stand. But it was the expression of absolute terror on both their faces that told me these men weren't just asking questions anymore. "Mom? Dad?" My voice came out like a child's, small and scared. "We're so sorry, sweetheart," my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They said they'd hurt you if we didn't bring you here." The taller of the 2 men, someone who looked like he belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than threatening families in suburban living rooms, smiled with the kind of warmth that made my skin crawl. "Ms. Mitchell, or should I say Ms. Hartwell, you've been remarkably difficult to locate." Eleanor stepped protectively in front of me, but her movement seemed to amuse rather than concern him. "Mrs. Hartwell," he continued, "how nice to see you again. It's been, 18 years since our last conversation." "You know each other?" I asked, my world tilting again. "Oh, we know each other very well," the man said. "Eleanor Hartwell was instrumental in arranging your adoption. She was also instrumental in ensuring that certain evidence from your mother's investigation disappeared permanently." The manila envelopes in my hands suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor's face had gone completely white. "Sarah, I can explain." "She can explain how she's been working with us for 20 years, the man interrupted. "How she helped us identify everyone who had copies of your mother's evidence. How she made sure those people met with unfortunate accidents over the years." My legs gave out. I sank onto the couch where I'd done homework every night throughout high school, surrounded by the people I'd thought were my family and my protector, learning that nothing I'd believed about any of them was true. "Eleanor wasn't trying to save you, Sarah," the man continued conversationally. "She was trying to contain you. We've been watching you your entire life, waiting to see if you'd inherited your mother's inconvenient sense of justice. When you disappeared and started conducting surveillance on your adoptive parents, we knew you were becoming a problem." "You're lying," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I was remembering things that hadn't made sense. How quickly Eleanor had found me, how perfectly her job offer had matched my skills, how she'd known exactly what training I'd need. Eleanor finally found her voice. "Sarah, they threatened to kill you if I didn't cooperate. Everything I did was to keep you alive." "Everything you did was to keep us informed," the second man spoke for the first time, "and to make sure that if she ever became a threat, we'd know exactly where to find her and exactly what she was capable of." The truth hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor hadn't been training me to fight these people. She'd been training me so they'd know how dangerous I was, so they'd know what methods would be most effective in stopping me. "The evidence Jennifer hid," I said, my voice barely audible. "You've known where it was this whole time." "We've known everything this whole time," the first man confirmed. We let you find it tonight because we wanted to see if there were any copies we'd missed, any surprises your mother might have left for us. Turns out she was even more thorough than we thought." He gestured to his partner, who pulled out a device that looked like a small radio. "We've been recording everything you found tonight, every envelope, every photograph, every audio recording. Thank you for helping us identify the last loose ends we need to tie up." "So, what happens now?" I asked, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. The man checked his watch like he had a dinner reservation to keep. "Now, Ms. Hartwell, you're going to help us make sure your mother's investigation is finally, permanently closed." But as he spoke, I noticed something he'd missed. My father, standing behind him, was slowly reaching for something in the drawer of the hall table. The drawer where he'd always kept his emergency supplies, including the gun he'd taught me to shoot when I was 16, back when I thought he was just being an overprotective dad. Some gifts, it turned out, come with conditions nobody expects. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in our small living room. The first man dropped to the floor, clutching his shoulder and screaming. My father stood holding his service revolver with steady hands that looked nothing like the shaking, defeated man who'd walked through the door. "Robert, you idiot!" Eleanor shrieked, but not at all like someone whose cover had been blown. She sounded like someone whose carefully laid plan was finally working. The second man reached for his own weapon, but my mother, who'd spent 8 months in self-defense classes I'd seen on her credit card statements, hit him in the throat with a move that sent him crashing into the coffee table. "What the hell is happening?" I shouted over the chaos. "Phase 3, my father said calmly, pulling zip ties from the same drawer that had held his gun. "Eleanor, call Detective Santos." "Detective Santos is already here," came a voice from the kitchen. Officer Patricia Santos, the same cop who'd done the welfare check months ago, walked into the living room with backup officers and paramedics. "Good work, everyone. We got everything we needed." I sat on my childhood couch, clutching Jennifer's evidence, watching my parents and Eleanor efficiently secure 2 men who'd apparently just been arrested in an elaborate sting operation I'd had no idea I was participating in. "Someone better start explaining," I said shakily. My mother sat beside me, really looking at me for the first time in 8 months. She looked exhausted but relieved, like she'd been holding her breath for almost a year. "Sweetheart, we never wanted you to leave. But when these people started getting close to finding you, we had to make them think we'd thrown you away." "Eleanor's been working with the FBI for 20 years, my father added, while paramedics worked on the wounded man. "She's the one who's been systematically building cases against everyone involved in Jennifer's murder. But she needed someone on the inside, someone these people trusted." "You've been undercover this whole time?" I asked Eleanor, feeling like my brain was moving through thick fog. "Your disappearance was the perfect opportunity," Eleanor explained. "These people had been watching your family for years, waiting for you to become a threat. When you left home under dramatic circumstances, they assumed your parents had genuinely rejected you. It gave us the chance to draw them out." Detective Santos joined our conversation, showing me photographs on her phone. "We've been tracking this organization for decades. Your biological mother's evidence was the key to everything, but we needed them to reveal themselves completely before we could move. Tonight, they gave us conspiracy, attempted murder, and enough recorded confessions to put away everyone involved in the original crime. So the surveillance training, the investigation skills, were real," Eleanor said. "You needed to be able to protect yourself, and we needed someone who could find Jennifer's evidence quickly when the time came. But mostly, I needed to know my granddaughter, even if I couldn't tell you who I really was." The wounded man was carried out on a stretcher, still conscious enough to glare at all of us with pure hatred. His partner was led away in handcuffs, no longer looking like a corporate executive, just a middle-aged criminal who'd finally been caught. "What happens now?" I asked, the same question I'd posed an hour ago under very different circumstances. My mother took my hand for the first time since my birthday dinner 8 months ago. "Now we go home, all of us, and we try to figure out how to be a family again, with the truth this time." My father sat on my other side, and for a moment we were just 3 people on a couch, damaged and tired, but finally safe. "We have a lot to talk through," he said quietly. "A lot of hurt to work through. but if you're willing to try. I'm willing, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Outside, the last police car pulled away, taking with it the people who'd cast shadows over our family for 2 decades. The living room fell quiet except for the old house settling around us, the same sounds I'd fallen asleep to every night of my childhood. We had a lot of healing to do, a lot of years to rebuild, but for the first time since my 18th birthday, I was home. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's making them earn the right to love you again. And sometimes, if you're incredibly lucky, they actually succeed. That's the real twist nobody sees coming. Forgiveness can be the ultimate power move.